So once I have these frames converted to blank keyframes, what that does is it essentially is like stacking all these invisible pieces of paper, or imagine film with individual frames that you can draw into each one of those. And so essentially what I've done is I've just created 2 seconds of animation space. So if I was drawing directly on film, I would have 2 seconds of animation, 60 individual frames to draw within. Let me show you what that looks like. So the first one here has a black circle, and what that black circle tells you is that there's content on that page or in that frame. I've made a mark of some kind. In this particular case, it's a circle. Now if I go to frame number 2, it exists. Notice that frame number 2 has an empty circle and frame 61 has nothing. So frame 61 really doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in my stack of usable pieces of paper or frames that I can work in. Now I can add more by simply dragging out. So if I wanted to do 33 seconds of animation, 3 30 frame blocks, frame or second number 1 is 30 frames, second number 2 is 31 to 60, second number 3 is 61 to 90. So I could do that and say, right click on there and say convert to keyframes. And now these frames exist. So now I have frame 1 to frame 90, which would be 3 seconds of animation. If I hit this little button down here, it'll play through that at 30 frames per second, and it stops on my last one. Now, let's see now what we can do to start making some animation. So frame number 1 has something in it. I'm going to go to frame number 2. Now when I go to frame number 2, I don't see anything. Now remember, that's essentially just like taking our original drawing on paper, right, and putting a new piece of paper over the top of it. Now I can't see through this. This paper, you actually can see through it, but on the computer I can't. But what I want to do is make it so I can see through it. And now this idea is called onion skinning. And Flash allows us to look through a sheet of paper, however many we really want, by clicking on this little icon. And when you do that, you get a very faint view of what is below it. So here is what I have drawn originally, and here is the next piece of paper waiting to be drawn on. So what I can then do is draw my next circle. So what I want to do is draw basically a circle just slightly different than the one I just drew. And I can see here, this is my first one, this is my second one. I'm going to move my third frame, and I'm going to then draw another circle. Okay, it doesn't have to be a circle, so it could be whatever you want. Now you're looking here, you're looking at this, and you might see these black little brackets outside of our red playhead or our timeline indicator. The red one tells you the frame that you're at. I can look and see that I'm on frame 11, or I could count from here, but I'm on frame number 11. If I drag this back and forth, I can move across in my timeline. Well, what this means here, if I click and drag these, this allows me to look ahead of frame 11 to the 3 frames ahead of it. And this is going to allow me to look 2 frames behind. Well, what that means is that when I'm looking at an animation that I'm drawing, I can set this up to see my current frame and what's behind it and what's ahead of it. So this is frame number 1. I'm on frame number 2, and I can see frame number 3. So I can see the past, the present, and the future of my animation. That way I can decide where I want this animation to go. So I can think of, maybe let's say at frame number 10, I've got to lay out kind of a path. Let's say at frame number 10, I can see 1, 2, 3, but I want frame number 10 to be right here. Maybe it's supposed to be there. And maybe I want to look at frame number 15. Maybe frame number 15 needs to be here. Maybe frame number 15 needs to be a different shape. Maybe it needs to be something like that. Well, now I can kind of see and lay out a little path for myself, and gives me a little bit of an idea of what and where I need to put my drawing. So now let's say that between this frame number 3 and frame number 10, I want to put in, say right here at frame number 7, this is 3, this is 10, let's say at frame number 7, I want to put in an object. So I can kind of start to break down my drawings and give myself some different kind of goals or places where things need to be. Now, I typically don't like to look at all of my frames at once. I usually just look at one frame, maybe 1 or 2 frames ahead of where I am. So this is where I want to be. I can do this and kind of give myself the target. So I know that somewhere in the middle here at this frame, maybe here at frame 5, I need to have kind of a middle ground. Maybe here, or maybe I want it to be a little bit closer to one drawing than another. And so I start to kind of then fill in the gaps. And I use this kind of this control to allow me to see where, oops, I'm going to undo that. I want to draw in between these two. So this allows me to choose the different spacings that I want to have. And when I choose the different spacings that I want to have, I end up getting particular types of movement. So for instance, if I wanted to create a larger jump of motion, for instance, I'm going to put in my in-between here. So I can put in an in-between between these two. Now my circles aren't always perfect, and I'm not worried about that right now. When I'm just kind of getting a feel for it. So if I want my objects to lean a little bit more towards one drawing or another, I might place this drawing a little closer to the other one. And then as I move, I can then see where my next one needs to be. Now if I keep this one a little closer to that one, the original, then I can get almost like a jump of motion. Okay, so as I do that, I can play through, and I can kind of get a change. I can get a feeling for where I need to be. So I want to look ahead here a few frames. I'm going to drag this. So I know that I need to be at frame 10 and at frame 15. Oops. I need to go from here to a different shape. So that means I can basically choose maybe an in-between, something perfectly in between, or maybe something a little bit closer, maybe one frame closer to the end point, and maybe this where I want to have a significant kind of transformation. Maybe I want to have it almost, maybe I want to go from this shape to that shape in a single frame. Now what's cool about animation is that you can test it out. It doesn't have to be perfect, and things you can experiment with the way things might look. Now here's something I might want to do. If I wanted to use an eraser, I can go and choose this block here, and I can erase a line on this particular drawing. Go back to my brush tool by hitting B, and then draw that. Now I can look and try to make a transformation. And what it ends up, however it ends up looking, is going to be based on the spacing that you decide on your drawings. But for now, I just want you to get a feel for creating your blank keyframes so that you can load up your canvas with a variety of pages to draw on, and then just get used to using the brush. So I can adjust, I'm going to go here, and I can adjust the different sizes of my brush by choosing my brush, and I can go into the different basically the different shapes down here. So I can choose my brush size. I can make it bigger, which makes me have a bigger, thicker, broader stroke. I can make it obviously smaller. And if you have a pen tool, the harder you press can sometimes change the thickness. Or I can change the actual size. So I can use a square. So if I have a square, I'll make straighter lines. If I choose a bigger block, I can make straight edges like so. If I choose a more of like a straight calligraphy, you get a variety of line weights. So, and I like that because it allows you to have different line weights to your actual brush. Now I'm going to go back to my eraser tool. When I choose an eraser, I can choose E on the keypad or choose eraser. I can again choose different shapes here as well. And if I didn't want to just try to erase all these lines, I can hit Control A. It selects everything in that frame and hit delete. Okay, I can go back to my brush and I can then again continue on in my animation, wherever it is. So at this point I want you to be just able to draw using the pen tool. Make sure you can set up your canvas or your palette with a number of pages so that you can draw into them and practice drawing. You don't have to draw a sphere. You can just make marks on your page right now and just see how things move and get comfortable making lines. Now, a shortcut to move from one frame to another is to use your greater than or less than keys on your keyboard. So when I'm drawing, I can make a mark, hit my greater than, and then make another mark, and then make another mark, and then make another mark. And so I can actually then make marks in a lot more efficient way. So I get this nice sense of movement. If I turn off my onion skin, and I can either drag through the canvas like this, or through the timeline, or I can hit my advanced keys. And one cool thing you can do is if you hit Control Enter, it'll actually play back your animation in a loop using a Flash or a SWF or a Swift file, and you can actually see the movement of the animations that you've made. So the idea of this is to just begin making marks and movements. You don't have to make something specific, but I do want you to start making marks and changing those marks over time, because it's really important to see what you can comprehend and what you can't. A lot of people want to make marks. So for instance, if I'm here and you put a mark here and then you put a mark over there and then you put a mark here and over there and then here and then you draw this, well, you can fill up the page with lots of different marks, and that's fine, but that's not really going to look like anything, because everything flashing on the screen for one frame looks more like static or more like artifacts on a film. And so what you want to be doing is really practicing creating some type of smooth motion. So for instance, I have this line here. Turn on my onion scan. I'm going to try to create a line that's drifting kind of at a slow rate, trying to keep things consistent. Slow type of movement. Now, remember, 30 pictures is 1 second. So you might draw 3 or 4 lines and think, wow, that's taking me forever. That's only 3/30ths of a second. So you can draw pretty much in the same spot and still have animation and movement. And then so right now I've done about maybe 8 or 9 drawings. I'm going to just speed things up here. I'm just going to kind of draw in the same place, and then I'm going to start to move it just a little bit down, a little bit down, a little bit down. And then I'm going to do that so the movement's kind of slow. And then I'm going to begin changing it. So this is slow movement. And now I'm going to sit here and pause it for a second. I'm just going to draw it in the same spot. Usually about 8 frames is a good pause. And now I'm going to move it at a more rapid rate. So the next frame is going to be here, and then the next frame is going to be pretty much the width of the object. Then I'm going to slowly, gradually increase that. So 1, 2, 3. So now 2 widths wide in movement. Every frame is just slightly larger. I'm going to add another one. So I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, and the next one's going to be 5,